Good morning. I'm Crissy Semeraro, Senior Vice President, Bank Operations Manager for Nevada State Bank. On behalf of Nevada State Bank, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is presented through nevadasmallbusiness.com. I've been with Nevada State Bank for more than 19 years, serving in roles ranging from branch service manager to loss prevention manager to quality assurance officer. Now, as operations manager, I oversee several departments, providing legal and operational support to all areas of the bank. My experience in loss prevention taught me valuable lessons in fraud, which I'm happy to share with you today. Now, I'd like to introduce our special guests. Detective Tyler Clark, who's been with the Reno Police Department for 23 years. For the last 7 years, he's been a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit, assigned to the Northern Nevada Fraud and Identity Theft Task Force. Dennis K. Meservey, CPA, is a sole proprietor of Dennis K. Meservey, CPA in Las Vegas. He has been a certified fraud examiner for more than 14 years and is certified in financial forensics. He currently serves as the secretary of the Las Vegas chapter of Certified Fraud Examiners. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The topic today is protecting your business from internal fraud, which costs U.S. businesses millions of dollars each year. To help minimize your risk of becoming a victim, the webinar will cover several key points, including what types of fraud are most prevalent, how financial checks and balances can make embezzlement more difficult, and what to do if you suspect internal fraud. We'll also have a discussion about external fraud and internet fraud. If you have questions for the panel, please submit them on Twitter using the hashtag NSBWebinar. Without further delay, let's get started. Before we go into the different types of fraud that are most prevalent to a business, we thought it would be best to understand first the 3 factors that cause someone to commit internal fraud. These 3 factors are pressure, opportunity, and rationalization, and make up what's called the fraud triangle. Dennis, you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, yes. When we have this triangle, it's actually a Dr. Donald Crissy who actually developed that. And basically, every fraud basically comes out from when somebody has a problem with opportunity or retaliation or pressure. This rationalization usually becomes the big area. Usually, say somebody has a problem with gambling, or they have several issues where they're living beyond their means, and usually people have this perception that they've been treated unfairly, and that's usually where that comes on the retaliation. One way to avoid that is to give them good incentives and awards and those types of things. Opportunity, basically if they have a fear that they're going to be, prosecuted if they're caught, I think that deters that. But basically, it's a bad behavior. If I do this, am I going to get caught?
And the interesting thing with rationalization is most people don't look at themselves as a criminal. They just see themselves as an honest person in bad circumstances. And so that kind of makes it okay.
Yeah, it's really just a perception. And that, again, is where the rationalization comes in.
Exactly.
And it can go way up the scale. I mean, there's so many reasons why people would do that. Another area is pressure, some unrealistic objective. Say you have a requirement that you have to do this, get this on a financial statement to make sure it shows a profit every single quarter.
Sure.
Sometimes that creates an issue. And again, one way to go against that would be to have a lot of ethics in the training and in the,
in the company,
attitude
from
in
the top
company.
down.
Yes.
Sure. So now that we understand why someone may commit fraud, let's talk a little bit about the different types of fraud that can come to a business. So Tyler, you want to tell us a little bit more about the common internal fraud schemes?
Well, a lot of times the bookkeepers, people that handle the money, have access to different avenues, such as maybe the credit accounts, the checkbook, the credit cards. And typically what they'll do is they start out small. It might be paying a grocery bill or something. There was just an emergency that came up with something in their life, and they had no other means of taking care of it. Okay. And they threw it on the company credit card. And then after they threw it on the company credit card, they realized, I have to cover this up somehow or find a way to get through it. They might change something in the books, make it a different title. And once they get away with it one time, then it starts to become a little bit easier. And then they might start paying for their groceries or paying their own bills with a credit card, and then just changing it on the expense report or handling it through their own expense reports. Checks, if you are involved in payroll, a lot of times they'll start to cut themselves their own payroll checks. And if there's no checks and balances there with that, and nobody's overseeing that, it becomes rather easy. And after they get away with it once or twice, the fraud will start to grow. And they'll get more brazen, and the checks will get bigger. And eventually, if nobody is looking into this, I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars taken from businesses by people who are trusted, who are in those positions and have the knowledge to change, Tyler's expense report, and I could fix it and alter it to make it look like I was on a business trip, and then cover some of my groceries or my gas bill or my power bill or my phone bill, things like that.
Okay.
The fraud-related or forgery-related issues, forging checks, counterfeiting checks. Sometimes it gets confusing between the two. The forgery side of it would be, signing the controller's name to the checks. If the check needs to be signed by two different people, a lot of times business accounts require those types of checks and balances. So I'll sign, and then I'll get a sample of your signature, and then I'll use that to sign your name basically to the checks, and I've forged your name, both you're a victim as well as the business is a victim. Okay. The counterfeiting side of it would just be simply printing your own checks, printing your own documents that are fraudulent.
How do people get those documents?
Well, the checks are very easy to come by. I mean, you can go out to Office Depot or Staples or any one of the businesses that sell office supplies and buy programs such as Versa Check or QuickBooks, and they come with check writing software that you put on your laptop, and then you take the check stock that comes with it, and you can start printing your own checks right off of the company. But typically small businesses, which is what we're hopefully addressing today, they have those programs, and that's what they use to generate their payroll. Sometimes they generate their accounts payable things, stuff like that. And if you have access to that, it's relatively easy to print your own checks and kind of get a little crazy.
With the technology that we have today, it just seems like there's so many ways to get information, so many ways to learn how to commit fraud. I mean, you can go online and learn how to wash checks and just crazy things.
So why do you think that it happens more often to small businesses?
Well, usually they don't have all the controls that they need to in place, and then there's only a handful of people that might not want to take a lot of time in that area because there's so many other areas that a small business owner would have to deal with, and they have a handful of employees that they've trusted for years, and usually that's the individual that you would never suspect of committing fraud. But unfortunately, we found that a lot of these people that were trusted when they had the occasion and maybe some spending problems or some issues with divorce or whatever it might be, sometimes they get themselves in a predicament where they almost can't get out, and they seem like that there's a reason that they should commit this fraud, and if it's available and they don't think they'll get caught, and some after a while maybe they do think they'll get caught, but they still do this for quite a while. I've seen where you have trusted employees that will figure out a way to support their gambling habits or whatnot here in Las Vegas, so it's tough.
So go aheid.
I think with small businesses versus the big businesses, it comes down to money as well. They don't have the resources. They can't have somebody who is completely in charge of the accounts and somebody who oversees who's in charge of the accounts, and there's no division there.
Okay.
It comes down to, I have my secretary that works for me, and she's also my bookkeeper. She also handles all my bills. She may even take in all the mail that comes in. So she's in total control of that. And the other side of it is education. They don't take the time, I don't think, to educate themselves into how things can happen. Okay. I think they look at it like oh, that only happens to this business, or that only happens to that business. It would never happen to me. Well, it will happen to you if you're not careful. And like he pointed out, technology has given us a great knowledge base. These people can go online, simply go on YouTube or one of those sites and look it up, how to commit fraud. Just Google it, and it will tell you the steps to take. I mean, you can learn how to counterfeit currency. You can learn everything on the internet now. It's basically a encyclopedia in a box.
Right, right. So from an education standpoint, hopefully we're helping with that today. But we have these small businesses that maybe don't know what to do in order to put these controls in place. So what are some steps that they can take in order to limit their risk of internal fraud?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different things that can be done. I mean, on a general basis, there's several different controls. I mean, what we found is that depends on the size. Usually the smaller, first of all, 5% of all fraud, all companies actually have 5% of their total revenues is taken through fraud.
Through fraud, and maybe they don't even know it.
And they don't realize it.
Okay.
And on a smaller business, they usually are hit harder percentage-wise than a larger company. But there's several different things that can be done. I mean, a lot of people consider the typical things, oh, let's have an external audit, and that does a lot of good, but you have to have these controls in place. Some of the controls might be working on a code of conduct. You might want to make sure you have internal auditors if you have a big enough staff for that. If it's a large enough company, you might want to consider a hotline, and you want to have a code of ethics that basically doesn't show that you're going to be retaliated for calling in on something or talking to people.
I read an interesting statistic that 40% of all fraud is more likely to be detected by a tip than any other method. So if you have an ethics hotline where someone can report something by a tip, and they even have outside vendors that you can hire that you can use if you have a small business that you can't have something dedicated just for that. So if you can, improve your chances by 40% just by having this tip line, that could be really helpful.
That is the number one way. The other would be management reporting that to fraud. But you need to have an anti-fraud policy, and you need to show some fraud training would be helpful, and let people know, probably job rotation, mandatory vacations. Those things, usually when you have a vacation, you find out a lot of new things that are happening in your office. I just had an employee last week leave, and wow, I didn't know that he was doing this and that. And I didn't find fraud, thank goodness, but it still is a good way to let the company know what is going on, and that recurring transactions, you make sure that others are trained too, so that you can find out what's going there. You want to reward people for whistleblowing, for telling about things. You don't want to make it judgmental or detrimental to these people who are reporting these things. I'd say you need to have some support programs. You need to maybe have some surprise audits or testing. There's a lot of areas.
What about checks and balances, as far as maybe who writes the checks isn't the person who signs the checks?
Yeah, I mean, there should be some controls. I think when we mentioned about different types of fraud, there's fraud such as asset misappropriation is usually where most of the fraud is. Now, the largest dollar amounts come from financial statement fraud, but corruption's right up there, with a lot too. But I would say for the small business owner, that's the area of most concern is where's the cash? Where's it going? And it seems like, when we do that, there needs to be some controls. We probably should have a open mail. It should be a separation of duties when somebody opens mail or check, copies when they're received. And who prepares the deposits? The same guy that creates the books on the records. Who reconciles the bank account. Sometimes if the same guy or individual prepares the reconciliations is the same person that makes the deposit and does the accounting, where's the controls?
All too often, that's what I have seen when we're working a case involving a small business, is that the same person who was doing the forging of the items or counterfeiting of the items was also the person who balanced the checkbook. And so every month they say, yes, it balances. when of course it did, because they're the ones who are manipulating the figures.
Some of the other stuff that I know to a small business might seem expensive or extravagant to go into, but background checks on people is huge. In this day and age, you don't know who you're hiring.
Absolutely.
And the background checks need to not just be criminal background checks to see what they've done in the past, but it's also important to know what their credit history is, how they deal with things. You know, if you've got somebody who has a bad credit history, has gambling problems, has problems like that, they fall into that category of going back to the fraud triangle of pressure.
Right.
You know, if you have horrible credit and you can't get a car to get to work, or you can't get a house, or it might find an easier way by taking out of the till. You might supplement your pay that way. You might supplement your house payment that way. So background checks are super important, I think.
And it's not all that expensive. You can do a background check between $50 and $150. So if you're a small business, you're probably not hiring people all that often. So that's not a big investment. And the amount of money it'll save you, if it is someone who's going to commit fraud, it's money well spent.
Down the road, yes, definitely. Yeah. And a lot of people have criminal histories. And that's not a bad thing that they have a criminal history, but you need to look at what their criminal history was. I mean, you need to see what type of crimes that they've been arrested for in the past, and that'll show up. And if it's anything fraud related, non-sufficient check related, anything to do with money,
right.
or the handling of money, or the breach of trust, that type of thing, you want to try and steer clear of those people. And
it seems like all these employees, they're the most likely to be the one that's going to go after the cash. It's not going to be the outsiders usually. So that's a very important area for small businesses. Now when these people, seems like when you don't report a fraud, it's not going to be on the system. So one thing I would encourage every owner is to make sure that if you have had fraud in your office, make sure you file the charges and see if you can get a prosecution, because otherwise this next person will just move on to the next location and they'll commit similar frauds and just keep at it.
And I'm sure you see that.
I see that all the time. You start digging into these people when you have finally somebody says enough's enough, and I'm gonna go forward with a prosecution or make a crime report, and then we start looking into that person as a suspect, and we find out that they worked at this business and they worked at that business, and you go back and start talking to these people. They say, well, you know, something was really never right with this person, and it was just strange. Things kept popping up missing and stuff, but we never really thought that anything would happen. Well, you know, yeah, maybe nothing will happen, but you know, you're also looking out for the other guy. We need to make a paper trail on
or maybe it was just $200 the first time.
Exactly. And you know, the cutoff for felony crimes in the state of Nevada now is $650. And that's quite a chunk of money, but it used to only be $250. The legislature moved it up to $650. So now that's quite a bit for somebody to be able to get away with, and it still just be a misdemeanor. And so people look at that and say, well, nothing's ever going to happen anyway. It's just a waste of time. I don't want to waste the police department's time. You're not. You can file these reports online. You could file them at the front desk. You don't have to call a police officer to come out to your business and take that time to do that. So,
but at least there's something
there's
there.
a paper trail.
Right.
And talking about employees, another thing that we should probably look at is there anything unusual about what this individual is doing? Are they driving this really fancy car? Do they talk about the yacht and these real long trips that they're having, or extravagant spending, or some very unusual areas, and they're only getting like $30,000 a year or something as their job? You might want to keep an eye on these things, because often those are the people that can create issues. And by the way, who is that typical person? Well, unfortunately, it could be man or woman. It could be at various ages. I think on a report that was done nationally by the Certified Fraud Examiners, a national organization, they said that probably about 65% are male and 35% female. However, in the United States, it's a little closer, 55% male and female. And in Canada, more women than men have commit fraud. So it could be a lot of different areas, and it crosses all different cultures, all different age groups. And So
And we talked a little bit about someone leaving and going on vacation and things like that. And one of the red flags is someone who never wants to leave and is just this dedicated worker.
That is one of them. That's a way that people hide it as well. I give my life for this business. I'm here all the time. I am constantly at the office. It's the person who's staying late at night, the person who comes to work sick constantly, and it's not. I don't want to paint a broad picture of that person, but it's the one who's the suspect who is actually taking the money. They have their checks and balances in their own mind, and they're keeping track of that. So if I'm cooking the books, we'll say, and you come in to fill my spot while I'm sick, you may find that.
Right.
So I don't want to take the chance of doing that.
Right.
So, I don't want people to get freaked out about being dedicated to their jobs and being dedicated to their employer,
Right.
because I fit that mold. I am there 5, 6, 7 days a week, and I really only need to be there 4. But, I don't want people to think that the dedication side of it is what causes people to commit the fraud. But
This is part of it.
typically when you find your suspect and you find that person, you start looking into their work history and how they are, and you'll start to interview other employees and be like, oh no, Tyler would never do that. He is so dedicated to his job and he is there every single day. I've seen him here sick. He's on his deathbed and he's still in here getting his work done. Well, yeah, he is, because he's
covering his
scared
tracks.
that, yeah, exactly.
Right,
Somebody's
right.
going to find out. That temporary employee is going to be brought in from a temp company and go, why is this doesn't make
Something's
sense.
not right.
And when we pre-sign checks, we don't lock up checkbooks. We're just setting people up for problems.
The easier, and you being in the banking industry know this, the easier we make it to spend money, the easier we make it to take money.
Right.
Simple
True.
as that.
That's true. So we talked about some of these steps that can, that people can put in place in order to, limit their risk of internal fraud. But how do these steps make embezzlement more difficult?
Well, it just deters. Really, if they're really desirous to commit fraud, I think most people can get around it. Collusion is often a good way to do it if they find a buddy that works together, and it's a lot tougher to discover those types of crimes. I think that if we make it more of we're not going to tolerate that, and we expect you to be ethical and do that type of training, and that we will prosecute if you do these types of things. I think if you have that type of an attitude, you're less likely to see as much fraud. Now, over how many $billion? I think it's about 3.5 trillion, dollars in the world is through just occupational type fraud.
Okay.
It's a terrible issue that over 5% every company can expect they're losing the fraud. So we're all paying for it. So it's a really amazing thing that every company you can expect over $140,000 on some mom and pop shop to be losing.
That's a lot of money for a small business.
I agree. I think education is the key, and being educated, being an educated business owner, knowing what your employees are doing. Not a micromanager. You're not standing over their shoulder the whole entire time tapping them, but knowing what's going on and having that air about you that you know everything that's happening will help curb a lot of internal theft. If I just take my books and say, here you go, and I don't like messing with that money stuff, you're in charge of that, have a good time, then you sit back and say, okay, you're not in charge of that, I'm in charge of that, and then you get that feeling that you have control of it as a suspect, and then you take control of it. And if I'm not asking you or inquiring about things, it just goes unnoticed, and you feel that you can get away with it, and eventually you'll start to get
And just
away
one
with
or two surprise checks, and they're going to know, oh, they come and check every now and then.
right from the get-go, right from hiring that employee, and it sounds silly at times, but you have to sit them down and tell them, like he said, we will not tolerate this.
Right.
I will be checking on things, and we have our ways of knowing. You don't need to know what our ways are, but we have our ways of knowing.
Put it in your policy manual.
Yeah, exactly, right there.
And I bet you most people who have been victims now do this, and the ones that haven't maybe don't have that in place, thinking it's not going to happen.
I think
It's
if
worth
you're a small business owner, it's your money. Treat it like it's your money that's coming out of your pocket.
Right.
Treat all the equipment that's there as your personal equipment. And how are you going to leave it laying around your house? Are you going to leave it laying around your house? Treat your business just like you would secure in your own residence.
Right.
Yeah, I think the problem we have with most small businesses is they're totally unorganized. They have no feel of how they should even put their accounting system, yet alone, these type of fraud resistance programs together. And so they need to spend some time, maybe get online and find out some ways there, and talk to professionals about that. But I think too many just do it by the seat of their pants, and they keep their checks, they write them out of sequence, they have them all over the place, or they have invoices that are all out of order. They take, they don't really have a control system with segregation of duties. They just seem to have a...
Well, let's hope with those that may be in that situation, with this advice, that they establish those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then what if they do detect that they think that something's going on, that there may be some type of internal fraud? Where do they go from there?
Well, get help, outside help too, on some people you can rely. I mean, if you suspect fraud, obviously, if you know fraud's there, the authorities, the local law enforcement would be the best place to go. Most of the problems you have with that is if you haven't found enough evidence, they might not be prosecuted.
Sure.
So you probably need to hire some outside professionals to look, and there's various ones, including fraud examiners and PIs and CPAs and lots of different, a variety of individuals. But I think you need to stop that fraud immediately. So get this person out of that area or fire them, whatever you think you need to do. But I do think you better get some help in that regard. I'm sure Officer Tyler here, Detective Tyler, he'll be able to
that's one of the things with small businesses. They may not be able to afford to go outside and order something up right away. I would definitely make a report. That's the first step. Make the report, have your information that you believe leads you to the suspect. Who the suspect is, how long they've worked with you, what is your evidence. And this stuff will all be put in your statement to the police department when you're making your initial report. Be as detailed as possible in it. I see too many statements that are a paragraph long, says, hey, I think Joe's taking money, and I think Joe's taken $150,000. End of statement. And you're like, you look at that as a detective, and if the small business owner or the reporting person isn't willing to put detail into it, a lot of times they don't get investigated.
Right. From a
they
staff
won't get followed up.
perspective, you
Yeah,
can't.
they won't get followed up on. I would be as detailed as possible in your initial report. Lay out all the information about the suspected employee. Any background history that you might have on them, any information that you might have, your bank records that show this is where the funny loss is coming from, or if it's equipment, if it's invoices that are not getting paid or getting paid to their friends or whatever. There's all those kinds of crimes as well. Materials that are disappearing. I mean, that comes all the way back to the embezzlement side of it. Embezzlement is basically converting companies' assets to your own personal use or profit from those. So that could be as simple as, if you sell widgets and I take 15 widgets at a time and I sell them on the side to make my own money, that's going to be an embezzlement thing if I'm entrusted with those widgets.
Small businesses, by the way, are notorious to not keep track of their inventory.
Exactly.
I mean, especially if you have a lot of small items, it's who's going to miss it? Some employee will say, but the reality of it is most small businesses don't do regular counts. They don't keep some sort of a tracking system for their inventory items, and it adds up.
So if you have that documentation in place at the beginning of the report, when the detective gets that, then they'll make contact with you and say, okay, I need this, and this as well. What other, do you have video? Do you have video in your office or your warehouse or whatever it might be that can support this? What other information do you have? They may require They may ask you if you've seeked out a forensic accountant to go through the books and look at the books. They may ask for your tax records, things like that, to show a pattern or to show where the money is going to help them.
So if they find just, let's say, one thing, would it be best for them to file the police report right then and then continue their investigation
Yes.
and add to it?
Yes,
Okay.
start as soon as possible, so we have a
Okay.
jump off point. So we know where this began. Too many times we get, well, over the past 3 years, Sandy has been taking money out of the till. Well, you have to look into statute of limitations in Nevada, and typically on most of these fraud cases, it's 3 years.
Okay.
And there's nothing we can do past that.
We find that at the bank quite a bit, especially when somebody hasn't balanced their statement. And they'll come to us and say that they've been, forging checks for the last 3 years, which, you agree to certain things when you open an account. That's why it's so important to read your disclosure. And it says that you have 30 days in order to balance your statement. And so then there's nothing we can do for them.
Right.
So some of those things are so important when it comes to timing. So it's
And
good to know to do it
timely
now.
review and timely reconciling
Exactly.
of your account regularly would help too on that, so
Right.
you actually find the fraud.
Right away.
So
right.
every company owner should definitely reconcile. A lot of times you might want to have the statement sent to your home versus
Exactly.
to the office, so that you
Exactly.
can look that over before it even gets to the
Or
staff.
even duplicate statements. And, you have your statements that go to your bookkeeper, but you also have your own statements that come to
Exactly.
you, and take the time to look through that. I know running a business can become very time consuming, but this is part of it. You got to protect yourself, because if you're not looking out for yourself, nobody else out there is going to.
Right. And if you're passionate about your business, sometimes the accounting side is not the fun side that you want to be participating in. But that, that's your bread and butter, so that's where you need to keep your eye on things.
And it just seems like with the electronic age, there's so many more opportunities for these frauds, as well as to not be aware and for people to change and do things. There's so many schemes out there that confuse and distort figures, and there's a lot of areas. I mean, we can go hours on just talking about computer fraud issues, but when we're talking about employees, for example, we might want to have policies related to what they put and don't put on their own social media type sites. And we also, recommend that when you get into these areas of controls, that only certain things are able to be seen by certain employees at certain times. So it's really complicated, though. It's not easy to do.
And that touches on background checks a little bit, too,
It
when you
does.
talk about social media.
Social media, the background checks, policies, like he touched on. Have a policy in place to deal with internal theft. Have it written out so that the employees see it and they know that there's a policy that states, you might put them on some type of unpaid leave pending an investigation, or any suspect fraud or theft or employee dishonesty or anything like that. Have that stuff lined out in your employee policies, because sometimes that's the only teeth that anybody has.
Right.
There may not be enough evidence. There may not be enough things to point to this person, and it may even become a civil type issue, where we can't, as law enforcement, take any type of action. We can't arrest a person, but they have more teeth in their policies within their company, to where they can say, I suspect you're a thief, and this is what I think you did, and I don't like it, you're fired. Done.
And because this is what you agreed to when you were hired.
When you were
Okay.
hired, you signed this document saying that if we suspect you were doing something wrong within the department, whatever, you're subject to termination.
Okay.
And have that laid out in advance, so that when the person is being hired, they read that, they sign off on it, and you can fall back on that. Because a lot of times businesses will come to us and say, well, what do we do? I think Joe's stealing money, and I think Joe's been stealing money for a long time, but I really can't prove it, and I can't do anything for you. I'm sorry, I can't be the one that comes in and fires him. If you have a strong policy within your company that you can deal with it, then
But
deal
you have
with
to
it there.
specifically say
'Cause
stealing's
you
not
don't-
allowed.
Yeah, well, it's sad.
Right, you're
well,
right.
When you go home tonight, pick up your hairdryer, pull down to the end of that cord, and it says, don't use in the bathtub.
Right.
That's
That's there
because
for a
somebody did it.
reason.
Yep,
Exactly.
exactly.
You'd be
So,
surprised at how many owners give their employees more than one chance, and it turns to their detriment. So
Yeah, 6
be
months down the
careful.
road, now they're $300,000 in debt or in loss
Right.
when they could have stopped it at 100,000. So that's where you have to have that strong policy.
And-
Along with these policies too, make sure that you bond your people who handle a lot of cash. That way you can, with your background checks, it also gives you some insurance coverage if that ever happens. That would help a little.
And another thing inside inside the disclosure for Nevada State Bank is it talks about when fraud is committed by the same perpetrator ongoing, because once
Due diligence.
exactly.
Yes.
So if it's the same person, again, you can't get reimbursed by the bank. You can go back to the thief, but more than likely they're not going to have them.
Well, that's it. Restitution is a beautiful word.
Right.
Everybody loves the word restitution, and you hear it in court all the time when the gavel hits and they say restitution.
Right.
Well, honestly, when the person, if the person goes to prison, how are they going to
Right.
give you restitution? They don't make any money there.
No.
They have no assets in the beginning, or they probably wouldn't be stealing from
We
you.
process restitution checks because we receive them as well, and they're at $12. So it's
Exactly.
going to take you a long time to get your money back.
Less than 50% is ever recovered on all frauds that are discovered.
Okay. Well, quickly, I know that we've gotten to a great discussion about internal fraud, but I want to touch on external fraud very quickly before we go to questions. So, what are some of the most common external fraud schemes, and how do fraudsters obtain client information?
There's a myriad of ways. The dumpster diving seems to be one of the biggest ones that I see. A lot of these people are going into the trash cans and finding information in the trash cans from businesses. They'll find voided checks. They'll find thrown away statements that have account numbers on them.
Okay.
They'll find all that stuff. I mean, number one, if you invest in anything, invest in a shredder that actually shreds things. It's not the straight line shredder.
A confetti.
That you can, tape it all back
Right.
together and make it pretty. The crisscross ones are the better ones. Shred everything that you have. Be careful what you're throwing away. I've seen, and it's dating myself a little bit, old school stuff, but the plates that have the account information that used to be put into the credit card sliding,
Knucklebuster?
yeah, those things. I don't know what they're called, but I remember seeing them, and they make the carbon copies of receipt numbers or of credit card numbers. I see that stuff popping up in the trash because it still at times gets sent out to people, or they have it and they've gone through their boxes and I don't need this anymore. We don't use this machine anymore, and they throw it in the garbage. Well, somebody comes along and finds that, and these things are like gold. Checks, when you're paying with checks, really reconcile your accounts and find out where your checks are being cashed at and to whom they're being cashed. Don't just look at the numbers, look at who's cashing them, because if I'm a business owner and I cut a check to you and you take that check and you have a drug problem or you have a gambling problem or you have some kind of problem that needs to be fixed, you can easily take that routing number, that checking account number. That is money to these people who are printing checks or counterfeiting checks. All you have to do is give it to me. If you give me that routing number, you give me that checking account number, I'll go on my computer at home and print out for
As many checks.
construction is a big construction company in Nevada. I will make construction payroll checks so that I can go in on Fridays to the casinos and cash those when payroll comes out.
Okay.
And because construction is known throughout the state of Nevada, they're in every casino's computer for good checks,
right.
for cashing checks. So it's very simple to do. That is like gold. So protect your statements. Know who you're paying your checks to. Don't throw things away like that. If your business is burglarized, don't just look at, did they take the petty cash? Did they grab the art off the walls?
Right.
Things like that people really look at for burglaries. Look at what records were taken.
And the back of the checkbook.
The back of the checkbook, yeah, go through the checkbooks, go through all the checkbooks and see what was taken out of those. I'll see thieves coming into businesses and stealing. They'll go to a car dealership and they'll steal filing cabinets. Well, inside those filing cabinets are credit histories of every single person who's bought a car. Well, that instantly turns into credit card theft, identity theft, check counterfeiting, all that stuff. Small businesses, landscaping companies are notorious for when they get a payment, they might make a photocopy of the check from you because we're doing your landscaping, I'll take your check, I'll make a photocopy of it, I'll put it in your file, and then I have your file, Crissy's file, in here. And if I'm a good thief, I'll go in and steal those files, because in that is going to have your address, your name, your business, if it's a business, some of your checks, things
Account
like
number,
that.
sort of
Account
thing.
numbers.
Some of these things are so easy, though. You can go online and use some ancestrycom, for example, and get some people who have passed away. You can get some personal social securities and death dates and things of that nature, and you can use that. So it's really a place where we need to be very vigilant. We need to check our credit reports. We need to. There's some national fraud hotlines too that unfortunately I don't have the number here, but maybe we can get it to your viewers. But that you can call that you would want to check and report anything that even anyone using your social security number and suspected of doing that. It just seems like there's so many opportunities. I know when we were at a restaurant one time, for example, my mother-in-law just let somebody use their credit card, and all they did is just go to another room and they worked out their methods of being able to. I mean, there's several ways to.
Sure. Credit card
Yeah,
fraud. I think we could have a whole other webinar on
Yeah,
that.
when you're talking about the external theft, that's it. Small businesses deal with a lot of computer stuff, internet things, wireless. They put out their website. They have sales through their computers. They have point of sale machines, those types of things. A lot of companies, those are private companies that offer those point of sale programs. And they'll come into a small business and set up that program. And if they come to my business and they set it up, I don't know anything about computers, and I don't really want to know anything about computers because it's all foreign to me.
Right.
Well, they rely on that point of sale person who's setting up that equipment. And a lot of times people leave things at their default. They leave the default login. They leave the default password. And now it's very easy to break into that point of sale. If you're running, say, a small pizza business, and you have a point of sale machine up front and your server in the back, and your point of sale machine is wireless, and you don't change your firewalls, you don't set up anything different than a default password and a default login, it's very easy for me to sniff around, basically,
Right.
or driving your system, and I'll sit outside with my computer and I will find your wireless in your point of sale machine, and then I will bombard it with, which is out there, lists of passwords that are default passwords and default logins. And I'll just bombard your system with those until it gets a match and it opens your system. And now I have a backdoor into your system. So everybody that comes in and buys a pizza and uses a credit card,
Get all that
I get their information.
Okay.
So that's your external theft. And the small businesses think about it and they're like, well, yeah, they're stealing John's credit card number and Dave's credit card number, but you know as well as I do now from the banking side of it, they go in, and when you develop a pattern at Joe's Pizza, and Joe's Pizza is the jump off point for all this credit card.
That point of compromise.
Right, the point of compromise for all this credit card fraud. Now, this small business owner has to do their own audit and their own forensic audit.
Right.
And those can be $40,000 to have an outside company come in and audit them in order for them to still be able to use the Visa logo or the Discover logo or any of that stuff. So that can crush a small business.
Sure.
So if you don't protect yourself from external
front.
stuff, you're done.
Right.
I mean, if the bank comes in and says, sorry, you can't take credit cards anymore, and that's part of your disclosure.
Right.
I believe even in your disclosures, it says if you're going to use our credit card system or a system that gives us money through credit cards, you are opening yourself up to external audits.
Right, and you agree to a
And
certain
you
level
agree
of
to
security.
it. Exactly, and
Right.
if you don't, it can burn a business to the ground
Right.
in a matter of days
Right.
if they're compromised.
Even ATMs, people can set up gadgets. So if you see anything like that, report it immediately
Right.
to the banks and
Right.
to others. I know the casinos are good at suspected activity reports, and there's a lot of opportunity to report whenever you have something that is of
Sure.
suspicious
Absolutely.
nature. And so we should keep our eyes open. But on the internet, again, I'm saying that there is a myriad. You can find
Absolutely, you can find how to do it.
how to
Right,
do it all,
right.
and you can find ways to prevent it. But also, with phishing and all these other things that have been around forever, it just seems like we have to be vigilant and get all your antivirus and your other softwares, keep them up to date.
Well, I think we're ready to go to questions. Question number 1 is from Edward. Is it better to have an accountant or bookkeeper on staff, or to outsource those functions to another company? Dennis, you want to take that?
Well, it's cheaper always to have them on staff. I can tell you that, because my rate's a lot higher than the normal. I'm a certified public accountant. There are times when you don't have the controls, that there are certain things that you need an outsider for. So I think no matter even if you do have it inside, internal, I think you should probably hire someone to oversee that you're, not doing things out of line. And I think especially when it comes to setting up your systems, making sure you're paying your taxes, and that you look at things regularly from an outside source.
So from a cost-effective standpoint, maybe have someone on staff and then have someone from the outside audit a few times a year?
It varies depending on the size and the needs of the business. But I do think you need to be vigilant, and probably you can get advice. You can go to a lot of these professionals, and they can give you ways to set up systems and controls. I think that's probably more important if you're vigilant. Now, if you're not vigilant, boy, only 3% of auditors find the fraud.
Right.
So I mean, 3% of the audits. So that's not the highest way of finding fraud. I think we need to stop it up front, and it starts in-house.
Right.
And so if you have enough employees, I'd like to see that you segregate it and set it up right that way.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Adam. As a small business owner, what are some resources to help me with best practices as it is related to fraud prevention?
Well, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has a website.
Okay.
And we'll have to provide that later on. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
That's the fraud line.
But they have a lot of best practices information there. They have things to look for, trends. They track all the trends. Just to educate yourself, if you go, like I said, go on the internet and Google it, how to protect my company, how to break into a company, you can find all that information out there and just start to educate yourself on how the criminal side of it is working, how they would think, how they would get away with embezzlement. It's a wonderful resource to use. The internet is great for that kind of information. Consult your banks. Talk to your banks. I'm sure that they're more than willing to come out and talk to you about it, or you come into the office and talk to them about what the trends are and how they can better protect themselves. If you have friends that are involved in accounting,
and we have tools that can help you in order to prevent that. Positive Pay is one fantastic tool where a business can send us a file letting us know what checks they issued. And then as those checks clear, we match them up. So if anything comes through that was not authorized, we're automatically going to kick it out, send it to the business to review. And if they don't want it paid, then we'll return it. So that's one way that they can protect themselves.
Very helpful.
All right, next question's from John. How often should I review my bank account transactions or my financial records?
I do it every day. I mean, I have an app for it on my iPad, on my iPhone. I look at my bank statements every day. As a business owner, you should probably look at them at least twice a month at the most, or at the least if you can.
Right.
Whenever your quarterly statements come in, and that's every statement. That is not only your bank statement, but you're looking at if you have cell phones with your company that the employees are using. You want to look at that. You want to look at any type of accounts that you have, credit card expense accounts, those type of things. Review them as often as you possibly can, but at the minimum, take a look at them twice a month if you can.
I say reconcile them monthly, but
yeah.
Look at them vigilantly daily.
It
just seems like there's so many opportunities for fraud or mispostings, in this day and age, I don't know anyone that hasn't had a problem because of somebody trying to use their...
And look at the accounts that you don't use as often.
Exactly.
Sometimes you have this general account that you use quite a bit, your payroll account, of course, but maybe you have this reserve account that you don't touch as often or not look at as often. Look at that one as well, because that might be the one that they're,
I've had victims who would be considered, I would consider them a small business, a doctor or whatever, that has their personal finance person or their helper that just oversees everything for them, handles their mail, gets their mail, opens their mail, does all that because they don't have the time to do it. One of them was well over $300,000 lost. I mean, he's a multimillionaire, but he lost, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in a period of time. And the only reason he caught it was one day when the mail came in, a credit card statement came in the mail, it fell out of the inbox and it landed on the floor. And as he was walking through, he picked that up and he was like, oh, credit card statement. Gee, I haven't looked at one of these in a long time. Rips it open and sees where his, whatever you want to call her, financial assistant, whatever, was taking the family on trips to Disneyland, all on his expenses. And he had no idea that it was even happening. And we went into the house and found, easily $200,000 worth of sports memorabilia. They had all Kenmore industrial appliances installed in this little house. They had new vehicles. They were making payments for their friends' mortgages. She was just spending money hand over fist. And the saddest thing about it is she was charged with one count of embezzlement. And at the time, the bail was a whopping $2,500. So she gets to go to jail and then gets the $2,500 bail to get out, and then goes through the court process and is given probation because she has no criminal history. This is the first time she ever did it.
Wow.
And there's over $500,000 in loss. And restitution, will he ever see it? Never.
Right.
Because a lot of it was on his credit cards and that, and now the battle was with him and his credit card companies and his banks and going back and forth there.
This happens more than we
Oh, absolutely.
And
We've
most of it
scraped the
isn't even
surface.
reported.
Sure.
So it's crazy. By the way, when people leave, too, make sure you change your passwords.
Yes.
Because they may have access to get in again.
Absolutely.
And try and keep your computers with all the data free from other areas and locked and secured. And, I mean, that's where you can have a lot of problems.
All right, next question is from Debbie. Aside from dedicated workers, any other red flags to look for?
Well, he brought it up earlier, people that look like they're living outside their means. They have more of an extravagant lifestyle. They're out partying or on vacations all the time. They're taking trips all the time. And you as the business owner know that you're only paying John so much money.
Right.
And how can John drive this fancy BMW? He lives in a 4,000 square foot house and he's doing all this and my business is struggling. And why is my business struggling? Right. Well, because John's taking money from my business and we're not really making what we should be making. Those kind of red flags come up.
I've got a list here that shows living beyond means is like 36%. Then the next one is financial difficulties people have. Usually, the next would be unusually close association with vendor or customer. Control issues, their unwillingness to share their duties. If you're divorce or family problems, wheeler-dealer attitude, if they're irritable or suspicious or defensive all the time, addiction problems, past employment-related problems, legal problems, instability in life circumstances. It just seems like there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, the very small businesses, the 5 or 6 or 10 employee businesses. I think that and I think we said this earlier, if the management or the owner of that business is more hands-on with what's going on and more involved with his employees or her employees, knowing more about them, getting to know them, having those company picnics, having those get-togethers where everybody's families get together and making that small business a family. So you're not so much knowing what everybody's business is, but you can get a read on what's going on in their family. You'll know when something's off.
Okay.
I hate to say, going through a divorce or medical problems or anything like that, but just genuinely caring about your employees and what's going on in their lives may help you stop something before it happens.
Okay.
You see that John's got these medical issues or something's wrong with his kids or anything like that, and you have some type of employee assistance program in place, or even you can refer them to something to help them out. That might stop something before it gets out of hand and ruins their life and ruins your business.
By the way, if they refuse to take a vacation, beware.
Yes.
All right, we have another question from Aaron. My bar deals with a lot of cash. Do you think surveillance cameras would be a good investment?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's a must in a bar.
Okay.
I would not open a bar without a surveillance
You
camera.
know, in a lot of businesses, we live in the technology age, and you can't get away from it. Cell phones have cameras. Everybody has a camera. You need to look into the state's laws regarding recording and things like that. But if you're in a public place and you're in that business environment, I would not only say to protect your own assets, but also to protect your employees. There's so many things that happen nowadays with workplace violence, with burglaries, robberies. I see hair salons being robbed because they're easy pickings. I hate to say it, but it's mostly women working in there. And so to protect your employees from the outside as well as protecting yourself. But when you do put in a system, you need to make sure that it's a high enough quality system, and it's not just the generic camera 45 feet away at the door facing the cash register.
Okay.
If you're concerned about that, and there's businesses out there that'll put in covert systems so that you can monitor things like that.
Okay.
But the details that need to be in place are full facial views of people that come and go from your business. You know, they'll mount a camera high in the ceiling, and the guy will come in with a hat on. So you want that camera shooting a face shot of the person. If they come up to your cash register, you want to be eye to eye looking at them.
So probably best to get a professional to help you with
Have
that. Don't
somebody,
install her.
Yeah, do that. Make sure, if you can afford it, do some off-site recording and make sure you rotate and you keep the tapes long enough that you can
And
look
make
at
sure it's
things.
recording.
And make sure it's recording. I know some people I've had where they were suspecting things and they realized the camera just wasn't even on the right area, and so it didn't do any good
Sure,
at all. So
sure.
it's very important.
And have that monitored by a high-level person within the business.
Okay.
You know, if you're the business owner, you're the one that has access to that. You don't give the bookkeeper access to that and the books and the credit cards and the checks and everything else.
And everything else. All right, this is the last question. Where can I get a background check done on an employee?
There are so many businesses out there, we could probably spend hours talking about them. I personally, again, I'll throw it back out there, Google it.
Right. I did actually look to
Okay.
see, and there is the National Association of Professional Background Screeners. So if you were to Google that, then you could look for a company that falls under that, and I think that would probably be a good starting
something in your
point.
area. Yeah,
Right.
something in your area, something within your price range. I'm sure that they offer a myriad of different types of background checks
Sure.
on people. There's private companies out there. I would do a keyword search for background check.
Okay.
And then just watch it populate, and then just start working your way through.
And that's important to do because the problem you have is some people will give a reference, and they have some sites who people will actually make up excuses for doctors to where you worked, what degrees you had,
Okay.
and a lot of times they're false. And so if you don't go to other sources, you'll never know till you have the crisis.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. What a great discussion that we had today. On behalf of Nevada State Bank, I'd like to thank our panelists, Dennis and Tyler, for presenting this valuable information, and thank you to everyone who participated, especially those who submitted questions via Twitter. If your question was not answered today, we'll make every effort to get you an answer in the next few days. If you'd like to see this webinar again or invite others to see it, a recorded version will be available within 48 hours on nevadasmallbusiness.com. You're also invited to the next Insights webinar on September 19th, which will focus on how to start a business in Nevada. It'll give you step-by-step discussion of the decisions, paperwork, and resources involved in starting a business to help put you on a path to a successful launch. You can register today at nsbank.com/webinar. As always, registration is free. Thanks again for participating today. Have a great afternoon.